Hello YouTube.com. This is a video on future population projections and what I think. This is a best guess based on previous data, based on how the trends have gone so far, which is to say things could change. There's all sorts of things that could make it go way up or go way down, but based on the best available data, what the world population will be from now, from 2020 to 2050 and then to 2100. How much it will increase and then decrease by those points in time. And this is based on the best available statistics. Now, the world population grows a little over 1% every single year, but this rate of growth decreases by 0.01%. So you subtract 0.01% from the 105, and then 0.01% from the 104 and the 103 and so forth and the 101, and then every few years you get a decline of 0.03 or 0.05. So right now the population is projected to reach 7.8 billion at a growth rate of 1.05%. And based on this, I project that next year we will have a population of 7.88 billion people, and during that year you have 1.04% growth rate. And then next year you have 7.96 billion with a 1.03% growth rate. And then the same thing in 2024. You have a population growth rate of 1.02 and a population of 8.04 billion people. All right, so we will reach 8 billion by 2024. Then in 2025, you have a population growth rate of 1.05% and 8.12 billion people. By 2026, this goes down to 0.98% because of, like what I said, every few years this goes down by more than 0.01%. This time it goes down by 0.03%. So this is 0.19. So this is 8.19 billion people. By 2027, this declines further in terms of the growth rate, but it's still growing. It grows at a rate of 0.97%, and so the world population would be approximately 8.26 billion people. By 2028, the growth rate declines again to 0.96, and the world population increases to 8.33 billion people. 2029, the rate of population growth is 0.95 with a total world population of 8.409 billion. Again, 2030, 8.48 billion with a growth rate of 0.93%. 2031, 8.588 billion people with a growth rate of 0.92% or 0.92. 2032, we have a growth rate of 0.91% and 8.66 billion people. By 2033, we have a growth rate of 88% and 8.73 billion people. By 2034, we have 8.885 billion people and a growth rate of 0.87%. By 2035, this goes down to 0.84% as the growth rate, and we have 8.959 billion people. And then we reach another billion by 2036. We have 9.03 billion people, or that's about 9 billion 30 million people roughly. So 9.03 billion, whereas in 2024 it got to 8.04 billion. So, but then next year we reach 9.012 billion, and the rate of growth, it's still growing, but the rate of growth declines to 0.82%. Then the next year, the rate of growth declines again to 0.81%, but this time the number of people is 9.195 billion people. Then again we have another major dip in the population growth rate, but again it's still growing. So even though the rate of growth has declined, the amount of people has increased, so it's a smaller percentage of an ever larger pie. So the percent of the pie, the percent of the pie is shrinking, but the pie itself is still growing. It'd be like if you were gaining weight every day, but you were gaining a slightly lower rate of weight gain every year. That would be the best analogy. So we have 9.26 billion people by 2038, and again, 0.78%. 2039, we have a population growth rate of 0.77%, and the number of people is 9.33 billion. And remember, these are just guesses, these are estimations. I am very much capable of being wrong, but this is just taking into account current trends and past trends. Like I said, this can change, but I don't see any good reason for it to change. By 2040, we have a population growth rate of 0.76% and a population of 9.401 billion, or 9,401 million people. By 2041, this rate of growth declines to 0.75% a year, or we now have a population of 9.476 billion. So 9,476 million people. And these are roundings, by the way. It doesn't include all the exact numbers there because I can't fit it all. And this is in the billions, right? This is 9.476 billion people. This number increases again to 9.54 billion people in 2042, with the rate of growth about 0.72. So this is another one of those bigger dips that you have every few years. This is 2042. By 2043, the rate of population growth will decline to 0.71%. The number of people will be 9.686 billion. By 2044, the population growth rate declines to 0.7%, and the number of people increases to 9.754 billion. By 2045, that goes down to 0.69%, but we have now reached 9.808 billion. In 2046, this declines again to 0.65%, and this gives us a population of 9.875 billion. This goes down again to 0.64% as the rate of growth, which gives us a population of 9.93 billion, or 9,939 million people. And then by 2048, we reach another billion people. So we reach 8 billion in 2024. By 2036, we reach 9 billion. And then by 2048, we reach 10 billion. And then the rate of growth, of course, declines, but again, it's a shrinking percentage of a bigger pie. So there's still more pie, but a smaller percentage of that pie. By 2049, that number is 0.62, 10.065 billion, so 10,065 million people. Then 2050, 0.6, so 0.6%, that's the growth rate, and then we have 10.127 billion people. So by 2051, we have a growth rate of 0.59% and 10.194 billion people. 2052, we have a growth rate of 0.58%, or 10.254 billion people. 2053, we have a growth rate of 0.57%, or 10.313 billion people, so 10,313 million people. By 2054, this goes down to 0.56% growth rate, but 10.371 billion people. By 2055, this goes again down to 0.55% growth rate, or 10.429 billion people, or 10,429 million people. 2056. 2056. We have a growth rate of 0.56%, or 10.486 billion people, or 10,486 million. By 2058, the population will reach 10.606 billion people, or around 10,606,000,000 people. Again, that is a rounding. That doesn't include all the numbers at the end. It's a rounding. So that is a 0.49% growth rate. 2059. The population grows by a rate of 0.48%, reaching 10.657 billion. 2060, it grows by 0.47%, reaching 10.708 billion people, or 10,708,000,000 people. By 2061, the world population will grow by 0.46%, or reaching about 10,758,000,000 people. By 2062, the world population grows by, what's the word for it? It grows by 0.4%, reaching 10.807 billion, or 10,807,000,000. And then we see something similar here, 0.39 by 2063, or 10.85 billion people, 10,850,000,000 people. By 2064, the percentage decreases to 0.38%, but we've now reached 11.27 billion. So it's no longer adding a billion people every 12 years as before. Now it's taking longer to do that. It took 16 years to accomplish this. 2065, we have 11.68 billion people and a growth rate of 0.37%. 2066, we have 12.01 billion people and a growth rate of 0.3%. 2067, we have a growth rate of 0.25%, or 12.36 billion people. 2068, we have a growth rate of 0.24% and 12.399 billion, or 12,399,000,000 people. 2069, we have a population of 12.428 billion people, or 12,428,000,000, at a growth rate of 0.23%. Then by 2070, 0.22% and 12,456,000,000 people. 2071, we have a growth rate of 0.21 and a population of 12.483 billion people, or 12,483,000,000. By 2072, we have a population growth rate of 0.2%, or 12.5 billion, just to round it up. 2073, we have a population growth rate of 0.19 and a population of 12.531 billion. 2074, population growth rate of 0.16%, or 12.554 billion. 2075, a growth rate of 0.15% and a population of 12.574 billion, or 12,574,000,000 people. 2076, we have a population growth rate of 0.14%, and then a population of 12.592 billion people. 2077, again, 0.13% growth rate, 12.609 billion people, or 12,609,000,000 people. 2078, we have a growth rate of 0.12%, or 12,625,000,000 people. 2079, 0.11% is the growth rate, 12.64 billion people. 2080, a 0.1% growth rate. So this is a new low in terms of growth rates. 12.77 billion. Now if we move further here, this is the first time we have below a point, we have a single decimal point to the right. We have population growth this low. This gets us back to levels comparable to the 1700s, but not quite there. So now we have a 0.09% growth rate, 12.89 billion people. 0.08% growth rate. 12.9 billion people, or sorry, that's 12.89 billion, 12.9 billion people. And then 2083, we have a 0.07% growth rate, 12.91 billion people, or 12,910 million people. 2084. And then during the 2080s, it stopped going down by, 0.05 and 0.03, because during this point, you just have normal rates of population decline. You no longer have a population growth rate decline because you no longer have the demographic transition anymore. That would stabilize. So 2085, you have 0.05% growth rate, but the population is 12.926 billion, or 12,926 million. And then now, by 2086, the population is still growing, but that rate of growth declines to 1700s levels of only 0.04%. And we have a population of 12.932 billion people. By 2087, this goes again down to 0.03% rate of growth, or now 9.37 million people. So now we're only adding a few million people every single year. We're no longer adding tens of millions of people, only a few million every single year. And so by 2088, this rate of growth goes again down to 0.02%. But now we have a population of 12.94 billion people. 2089, this goes down to 0.01%. Or we now have 12.96 billion people. And now finally, we have no more growth, but we have now reached the peak of population, 12.97 billion people. So we don't ever reach 13 billion people, but we get pretty damn close to 13 billion people. But now we start to see some natural decline. So we now go down to 12.96 billion, right? So we lose 0.002%. 12.935 billion, we lose 0.03%. 12.897 billion, we lose 0.004%. So basically, we reach the maximum number of people by 2090, then we lose about 120 million people. So 120 million people lost between 2091 and 2100. A very small rate of decline. Now let's look at per capita incomes. In 2020, the per capita income of the world is about $15,000. That's just the average. By 2050, it's projected to be $25,000. And then by 2100, it's projected to be $60,000. And I get this information from futuretimeline.net, which gets it from the OECD, or the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. So we see we will have both a substantial increase in population as well as in per capita incomes between now and 2100. So I'm Thomas Richardson, signing out. Talk to y'all later.